Welcome back to Life's Chillent. My name is Avital, and this week we have a very special guest, Jacob Steinberg, who is the Chai Membership Coordinator for the Neve Shalom Synagogue in Paramaribo, Suriname. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for inviting me.
So I'm very interested about you. How did you end up in Paramaribo?
I used to work as a consultant for international projects, infrastructure projects. And one of the clients of mine was a Canadian gold mining company that had an operation in Suriname. And they asked me to go there for help them in solving some issues because I speak Dutch, and they sent a couple of auditors that spoke only English, and they didn't cooperate with them. So I ended up I thought for 2 weeks in doing my job, but it was so successful that they asked me, it was extended for 3 years. So almost 3 years I spent in Suriname. And because it's such a small Jewish community, I became immediately part of the community, became my second family, and it continues until today.
And then once you became part of the community, how did you end up in the position that you hold now?
So when I left after 2 weeks, the first 2 weeks, and I thought that will be the last one, I felt sorry, because it's such an isolated Jewish community. People have no clue where Suriname is in the world, in the Jewish world. And I didn't know what to do with it. They were so nice, kind, warm. And I saw the challenges of a small and isolated Jewish community in the middle of the Amazon basin. And I think, what can I do to help? And I was not involved in the past in any NGO or Chesed committee in my synagogue or something like that. But on the way home, on the flight, I came with an idea. I had beautiful pictures of this gorgeous synagogue, and it's very unique. It's different. It's a wooden synagogue, very old, with sandy floor and whatnot. And I said to myself, it's just before the high holidays in North America, and it's when you renew your membership in the synagogue, and I will start to hear the complaints from my friends about how expensive it is and whatnot. So I came with an idea, and I said, I'll show my friends the beautiful pictures of this synagogue. And I said to them, for $18, you can become a Chai member in this beautiful synagogue. And for $180, you become a lifetime member in this beautiful synagogue. And you have all the rights like anybody else in the community. You can come to service, you can have bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah, weddings, whatever you want. The only problem, I said to them, is that you have to fly to Suriname. It will cost you about $1,000 to attend Shabbat service. But the idea, I said to them, it's not a membership that you'll have to renew every year. It's a one-time donation to support the community so they can live meaningful Jewish life and thrive. Because Suriname is a poor country, and $18 in Canada or US is huge for them. And therefore, that's how the idea started. And my friends were laughing, but they signed in, and it became, then I made the website for the community and so forth and so on. And it started to like a snowball effect. And we have today more than 150 members from all over the world, from Australia to the Netherlands, to Europe, to Canada, to you name it, South America, Caribbean islands, you name it, I'll have a member here or there. So that's how we started with the Chai membership. And again, the objective is to help them in special projects that they cannot fund themselves. And we will maybe discuss it a little bit later in the interview.
That's a really wonderful idea. I think that so often smaller communities face the issue of, let's just say that there are 10 families who can contribute financially, going to the same 10 families for every project that needs donations. So it's wonderful that you were able to find a way to take this on the global level to find people to help support a small community. So the Jewish community in Paramaribo, it's very old. Dates back to the 1600s. So it's a pretty old community. And there's a lot
Even
of
older than me.
even older than you. Me too.
Yeah.
But if you could share a brief history, talk us through how Jews end up there and a little bit of their timeline up until now.
The history starts after when the Inquisition in 1492 in Spain, the Alhambra decree gave the Jews a couple of options: expel, leave Spain, convert, or die. Excellent options. So about 100,000 Spanish Jews left to different countries: Portugal, Italy, Turkey, the Balkan states, North Africa, and 200,000 stayed and converted, and they became, as we know them as Moranos, or Anusim in Hebrew, or conversos. 4 years later, the Portuguese royal family came with their version of the Inquisition. But the Portuguese Jews had only two options: convert or die. There was no expulsion. So they converted to Christianity. And 90 years later, the 4 northern provinces of Holland got independence from Spain. And the first thing, or one of the first things they did, was to declare at that time, revolutionary concept called freedom of religion. As a result, thousands of Portuguese and Spanish Jews, conversos, moved to Amsterdam, and in 1600 they started the Suriname, the Dutch Jewish community. They didn't allow, they have freedom of religion, but they didn't allow to own land, and it was agrarian society at that time. It's before the Industrial Revolution. So if you didn't own land, you had limited opportunities to live and to thrive. But the Dutch colonies in the New World required lots of hands, and not many farmers in Holland were willing to relocate. So the Jews took the opportunity, and thousands of Portuguese and Spanish Jews that lived in Amsterdam moved to, at that time, what called Northern Brazil. It was a Dutch colony. Today, it's the city of Recife. And they thrived there for quite some time, until the Portuguese, who at that time colonized Brazil, attacked Recife, or northern Dutch Brazil, and they occupied it. After the occupation, they started knocking on the Jewish door, Jewish citizens, and, you know, who are you? Knock, knock, who is there? It's the Inquisition. The Inquisition told them that your grandparents converted to Christianity, and here you are living again as Jews with synagogues and whatnot. So the Jews tried to escape and find new homes anywhere. They didn't want to go through this scenario again under the Portuguese. So in 1639, first group of Portuguese Jews moved from northern Brazil to the jungles of where Suriname is today. The place was discovered in 1593 by the Spanish, but never colonized. So the Surinamese, the first group of Jews were basically the first settlers in Suriname, without flag, without a nation. They just cleared the jungle and started sugar plantations. In 1665, a war between the British and the Dutch in European waters started. And after a couple of years, before that, the British were afraid that the Jews will leave. So they granted them special privileges. By the way, the Jews at that time were not allowed to live in England, but they encouraged as many people to be settlers in their colonies. So they gave them special privileges so they will not leave, they will stay, because they were the backbone of the economy. And the special privileges that they granted were freedom of religion, freedom to have their own school, Jewish schools, freedom to have their own court of justice. So that means they are not under British rule. They have almost independence. And the freedom to have their own civic guard or army, militia. And that means that they were the first, the only Jewish diaspora community to achieve complete political autonomy before the founding of the State of Israel. In 1669, they gave them the right to establish a Jewish colony known as the Jewish Savannah, or Joden Savannah in Dutch. So now the Jews have all the privileges and their own place. They don't have to live with the British anymore, or the Dutch, as to say. It's their own community. And for them, they felt like here in the jungles, they found their own promised land. And they called the place Jerusalem on the riverside, because it's along the Suriname River. And they started to build their own Jerusalem in this location. And they built a synagogue there, a brick synagogue. It's called Neve Shalom, blessing and peace. And that became, the Jewish savannah became the center of universe of the community. They have the synagogue there, the court of justice, the school, the communal authorities, etc., etc. And what it's important to understand that the special privileges gave the rights, the special privileges only to Sephardic Jews. So they started plantations, and in 1694, there were about 575 Jews who owned 40 plantations at that time. But the success, was feeding on itself. And 43 years later, in 1737, there were between 1,500 to 2,000 Jews in Suriname. Of them, about 800 who lived in the Jewish savannah and owned 115 plantations out of about 400 in the country. And because Europe was a very religious continent at that time, in the 17th, 18th century, and so were the Jews. They're Orthodox Jews. So they named the plantations with biblical names, such as Carmel, Beit El, Hebron, Beersheba, Machanaim, Sukkot, Gilgal. You can go on and on and on. So if you look at the map at that time, you thought that you are really in the promised land, but it was in the middle of the jungles. And that was until 1765 to 1795, when social, political, and financial changes caused the collapse of the sugar-based economy of Suriname. And that was the beginning of the end of the sugar plantations economy. And 50 years after their peak in 1737, where there were almost 2,000 Jews and 150 plantations, 50 years later, there were only 46 Jewish plantations left. And they were mainly lumber and coffee, but no more sugar. And the Jews moved to the capital, Paramaribo, the new capital. Those who left the plantations closed them down. And 2/3 of the community, because of the collapse of the economy, drove down to poverty from very rich. And only 22 families, or about 100 people, stayed later on after the collapse in the Jewish savannah. And most of them, those who moved became professionals and traders. And many start leaving the country, going back to Holland, going back to Europe, going to the New World, to America and whatnot. So the numbers start to decline very fast, because if in the peak, as I said, between 1737, there were about 1,500 to 2,000 Jews in Suriname. In 200 years later, in 1737, there were only 790 Jews left. And when Suriname gained its independence in 1975, there are less than 500 left, and the numbers continue to decline.
I'm not a history buff by any means, but this was a history that I was unfamiliar with, the Jewish history here in Suriname. And yet it's fascinating. I mean, a sort of a self-governing group of Jews, again, like you said, outside of the state of Israel, where they really had sort of their own autonomy, is incredible. And yes, not very well known. So I
have to tell you one thing, Avital, that even today, with everybody exposed to anything and everything, we have Google, we have everything in our fingertips. When I said to my friends the first time that I'm going to work in Suriname, the most common response was, Suri who? None of my friends knew anything about Suriname. One of my friends always say to me, Jacob, I'm afraid they're sending you to work in a place that doesn't exist. Before 1939, when Hitler came to power, the Nazis from 1933 to 1939, they had the Judenrein policy, which means clean of Jews in Austria, in Germany and Austria. And they encouraged the Jews to get out of the Reich states. And they had nowhere to go. Nobody wanted them. So President Roosevelt made a conference in 1938. It's called the Evian Conference. He invited 38 countries to attend in order to spread the flow of refugees between those countries. And it was a 1-week conference. And unfortunately, nobody wanted to take the Jews. However, there were a couple of colonies in the area. At that time, they accepted Jews. A colony that allowed Jews to come was Suriname. And Suriname had no restriction of how many Jews will come. There were hundreds of Jews coming, but the problem was, again, Suri-who? Most people never heard about Suriname. There was no embassies of Suriname to get visa to come, or there was no need, but there was no way to come. Even if today it's so difficult to arrive to Suriname, there are very few flights coming. Imagine at that time during the war, you know? So the doors were open, but nobody knew about it, and very few people came. 2 examples of who came. In 1938, the entire Sephardic Jewish community of Hamburg, Germany, moved to Suriname. And the last group was 123 Jews who came in Christmas Eve in 1942 from Portugal, from Lisbon, on a ship called the Naesa. And in between, whoever came, it was with open arms. There are 2 things. The community, the Surinamese people, opened their hearts and their arms. They were poor, but they collected pots and you know, whatever they had from basic things. And when the Jews came, the refugees arrived, they stayed in a villa that was ran by the American Joint Distribution. And until the local government of Suriname, not the colonial power, the local government, built them small houses in Paramaribo. When the houses were built, they moved to those new houses, and they could, you know, get jobs in the booming economy. People loved the Jews and tried to help them as much as they can. The Governor General from Holland, the representative of the Queen, they tried to do as much damage as they could. They didn't like them to come, but the local people opened their arms, and whoever came, nobody was sent back. They stayed until the end of the war, and so forth. So this is the story during World War II. But then, interestingly, after World War II, you think it's over, but it's not over. After World War II, there were, 7 to 11 million people in Europe, displaced persons, or DPs. And they were in camps in Germany, Italy, and Austria. So there was a group of people from New York. It's called the Freeland League. It was a non-Zionist organization led by Dr. Steinberg, not related to me. And he came with an idea to settle 30,000 Jews from DP camps, Holocaust survivors, in Saramacca. Saramacca is a district in Suriname. It's only 50 kilometers away from Paramaribo, but it was in the jungle. At that time, there were very few people lived there. There were no roads in the jungle. There was no bridge over the Saramacca River that had connected to Paramaribo. So he decided to settle there 30,000 Jews. He started lobbying to the Dutch government, to the colonial power, and the local Surinamese government signed a document that they allow 30,000 Jews from DP camps to settle in Saramacca. So they started to make plans for they send in a delegation, and they also raised at that time $35 million to fund the plan. So the local government will not have any expenses. It all will be fully funded by American donors, which is equivalent to almost $475 million in today's money. But it didn't work because in May 14th, 1948, the state of Israel was, maybe I can't remember exactly the date, but the state of Israel was established, and the colonial power, Holland, forced the local government to abandon the plan to have the the Saramaka as a home for 30,000 Jews, because they said now the Jews have their own land and they can go to Israel. And that's the story today. There's one community. The contents of the Sephardic synagogue in 2010 were moved to a replica that was built in the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. So if you go to Jerusalem today, to the Israel Museum, you see all the Aron Kodesh and Bima and all, just exactly replica of how the synagogue in Paramaribo stand. The building is still standing there in great shape and belong to the community, but the contents are moved to Israel, to the Israel Museum. And also at the same time, in 1999, they decided to move from Orthodox to liberal. So everybody will feel welcome in the community. And it is a liberal community today, but it's hard to break traditions. And, you know, they closed the Ezrat Nashim, so the ladies will come down, but even today, they sit in one side and the men in the other side. And when the high holidays services are traditionally Orthodox, you know, the long services, and that's the status. So today, the community is declined very fast. The community lost lots of members over the years because few factors. First of all, there was no flow of people from Suriname to Holland or Holland to Suriname. It became only one-way flow. And when you lose the critical mass, so most of the people are moving out of Suriname. For example, if you go to study in Holland or other places, youngsters don't come back, you know, most of them. The community aged, the community lost, old members, like 13 in the last few years, and 24 young over the years, you know, that moved, as I explained, to other places and whatnot. So there is a problem of there's no flow of Jews to Suriname. And as a result, the youngsters that still live there have no opportunity to meet Jewish partners. And that leads to assimilation. So this is one very important problem, the demographics of the community. The second is the rabbinical, the religious issue. For more than 60 years, the community have no rabbi because they cannot afford having a full-time rabbi. And the third one is financial, because it's such a small community now, about less than 100 members, about 80 members. So they have 2 synagogues to maintain, 3 cemeteries, Jewish cemeteries in Paramaribo, and many other assets, and they are old and expensive. So they do miracles, but it's expensive, they need money. Suriname is also in financial crisis, economic crisis. Inflation is over 50% per year rate. And as a result, there is restrictions of use of foreign exchange. So people in Suriname, it's very difficult to buy. You cannot buy in the bank euros or dollars, US dollars. So what do you do if you want to import things? For example, the matzot and kosher wine for Passover, there's nothing Jewish there. You know, in the United States or in Europe, you want to buy something Jewish, you go to the supermarket in your neighborhood and you buy whatever you want, challah or candles or whatever. In Suriname, everything Jewish has to be imported. And as a result, what do you do when you have no access to foreign exchange to buy it? So the matzot and kosher wine, the community buys from a supplier in Miami. How do you pay for it? So that's where we started the Chai membership. And we help, for example, with the matzot and kosher wine. I pay the supplier in Miami with US dollars. The community pays for the shipping, or boat or plane, depends. And that's the major cost. But you can pay it in Surinamese dollars to a local shipper. And that's a win-win. And as a result, we have every year the community Seder, which is amazing, you know, and so forth and so on. So that's basically how they respond to the challenges. And then came the high membership, as I said, that I started. And with this money, we did all kind of projects. You know, I'm not going to go to many of them, but only a couple of them. One was fixing the mikvah. It's almost 180, almost 200 years old mikvah. It was broken pipes there, and They couldn't afford the money to fix it. So we managed with the high membership money to fix it. It's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. You don't see this kind of mikvah anywhere in the world anymore. And we arranged a birthright trip to 16 Israeli youngsters of the community, and they came to Israel. And what's beautiful is when they visited Jerusalem, they went to the Israel Museum as well. And it was coincidence that the same day they opened the gates for the replica of the synagogue, where their grandparents and parents and grandparents for generations used to get the bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah, weddings and whatnot. And it was so emotional for them. So that was another project that we did. And, you know, one of the major things was the cemeteries in Paramaribo, the 3 cemeteries, they're very old. There are some of them, tombstones from 1716. You know, I have one picture of one, you know, very beautiful tombstone, 1716. But it wasn't fenced. At that time, the beginning, it was in the outskirts of Paramaribo. Today, it's almost in the downtown. So it became the dumping ground of the city of Paramaribo. It became so filthy and dirty. And then the jungle took over because people were afraid to come. And then the junkies came and became their camping grounds, you know. And it was just appalling. And the community said the only way to do it is by fencing it with a strong metal fence that nobody can break it and get in. And that's what they did. Luckily, one of their bigger suppliers for materials for construction gave them credit, you know, at cost without interest, and just pay as you can. And they paid it very fast. But they fenced the 3 cemeteries. The city of Paramaribo before helped the community with labor, tractors, and trucks. And from each cemetery, at least 50 to 100 trucks full of junk, construction material, anything and everything was removed. The jungle was cleared, the fence were put on. And today, if you drive in Suriname, in Paramaribo, where there are so many ethnic groups and so many religions living in the city, the Jewish cemeteries are the most beautiful, respected, and just amazing. What a turnaround of things happened. So we have all the 3 cemeteries fenced, clean. Every 2 weeks, they cut the grass. Once or twice a month, not a month, every couple of months, they clean the tombstones, you know, so it would be readable and whatnot. So this is amazing project that they did, but it was helped also by the high members. And again, if it was in North America, it was, you know, I don't think any community could afford fencing such long cemeteries in 4 sides, you know. But in Suriname, cost of living is much lower, and the donations of high members help to do that. In 2015, I visited the community and I met with the leadership. And they said to me, Jacob, you know, 70 years ago, at that time, in 2015, World War II finished. And they said, in the last 50 years, we tried to build this memorial monument for the Surinamese Jews who died in the Holocaust, but we couldn't afford it. And they said, you know, it's 70 years after the war. If we will not do it now, we will never do it. So I asked them, you know, President Schul, Donk, you know, Schul, what are you talking about? The Holocaust was in Europe, you are in South America. And he said to me, you know, as I said, Suriname was a tiny country, less than 200,000 people. There was no university. So if you wanted to study, you had to go to Holland in university. If you were a professional like a doctor and you wanted to specialize, you had to go to learn in Holland. If you're a businessman, most of contacts were in the Netherlands. And many members, as I said, had family members in Holland. So there was a flow between here and there. And all those people, he said to me, were in the wrong place at the wrong time. So he said, we identified about 84 names of Jews from Suriname who were murdered in the Holocaust, but we know that there are more. We just don't know how many of them, because they were murdered with the entire family. So I had to find how to do it. So I contacted Yad Vashem and the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. Emails, nobody responded. I called, left messages, nobody came back. Time was ticking. We felt we are in dead-end street. But again, miracles happen. I was working at that time in Abidjan, in Ivory Coast, in West Africa, country called Ivory Coast. And from all places, I met there one day a young historian. And we started to talk, and he works for Yad Vashem. So I told him the story, and he said to me, Jacob, you know what? In 2 weeks, I'll be back in Yad Vashem, and I will connect you to the right person to deal with. And indeed, 2 weeks later, I got an email from Dr. Alex Avram from Yad Vashem. Dr. Avram is the director of the Hall of Names. The Hall of Names is the central database of Yad Vashem for all the Holocaust victims. He is the authority in the world for Holocaust victims, and he took it upon himself. He didn't delegate it to one of his researchers or managers to deal with me. He did it himself, me and him. And we exchanged the lists of names. They ran the databases. They had about 24 names or 24 names that we didn't have. And we had about 20 names that nobody, as I said, the whole family was exterminated, so they didn't even know that they died. And we exchanged a couple of times, iterations back and forth, and then we came to the conclusion that we have now the complete list, and the most complete and accurate list. And we passed the names to the architect to engrave it. The stones came from China, and in March 2016, there was the ceremony for unveiling the memorial monument of the 104 Surinamese Jews who died in the Holocaust, which was almost 20% of the community. The Jews in Suriname do not face any discrimination or any sign of anti-Semitism. They are accepted, they are loved by the community, and they are friends with everyone. And it is especially nowadays with all the turmoil that's going on in Israel and in the world, with anti-Semitism and what, Suriname is an island of sanity, friendship, love, and camaraderie. And it has to be mentioned because it's very, very unique in today's world to see such a wonderful coexistence by anyone and everyone.
That was incredible. So much rich history and insights there. Starting with what you just said towards the end, though, right now, why it seems like throughout the history from the beginning until now, as you mentioned, that Suriname has been very open and welcome to the Jews, to the Jewish people. What about sort of maybe the culture in Suriname makes it such a welcoming place for this diverse sort of melting pot of people? Is it how small it is, that everybody needs each other's support? What are some of the factors that play into that?
I think it's an excellent question, and I'm asking myself this question many times. I worked in an office, and there were, a group of people from when I worked in Suriname, almost every religion and ethnicity. And after work, I thought nobody will go with the other one to socialize. And I was surprised. They said to me, Jacob, Thursday, do you like to come with us for dinner or something in a Javanese restaurant? I said, why not? And I went. And they were just like, the color and nothing was a barrier. Everybody is friend. And I asked them at the time, what makes you so united? And they said, we are Surinamese. They see themselves as Surinamese. This is from this religion, this is from this ethnic group, but they don't see it as we are better than the others, or the others we owe them something from 200 years ago. They all accepting each other. They are married to each other. The ethnic groups. There's a big mixture of population, like 15% almost of the population is mixed race, and they are who they are, and it's a really very unique. We're living in harmony with anyone, and as I said, you have to take care. You have a fence around the synagogue. You have guards and everything, because we are not that naive. In this world, idiots can come from other places and find the soft belly and attack. But on the other hand, nobody is afraid to go with Magen David in the street or Kippah or whatever. What a beautiful thing, there are a couple of businesses owned by Jews in Suriname, in Paramaribo. And it's so unique to see a big sign on the door, in Dutch, saying the business will be closed on Monday because of Yom Kippur, and a big Star of David. And the same is, in the Yom Kippur and in the Rosh Hashanah, and they're not afraid to do it, and they don't keep their business even, it's non-Jews working there. Everybody get a day off or 2 days off, and the business is closed.
So I was going to ask you, I know you mentioned regular services for the high holidays, but for every Shabbat, is there minyan? Do you get 10 people to come for services?
Yeah, so, sometimes it's challenging. So what we did a few years ago, we have every Friday night Erev Shabbat service. After the service, the community is moving. We have a small social hall, near the synagogue. So the community is moving there to do Kiddush together, and then Shabbat dinner together, Friday night dinner together, the whole community. So that's done every Friday night. Saturday, we have because we start very early in the morning there, so it was difficult for people to come and whatnot if they don't have car and they have to take the public transport. We decided to, and with the decline of numbers, we will have once a month. And unless there is a demand, somebody coming guests from another country, from Holland or from Israel, and they want to have, so we will make an extra service. But normally it's a Friday night service every week, and Shabbat once a month normally, and every holiday is celebrated. I mean, from A to Z. Sukkot is the whole 7 days. Every night, all the members are coming and sitting in the sukkah together. And as I said, Passover is a community seder together, like all of them with the families and friends and whatnot. So it's a very, very holidays are kept beautifully. I have to say, Purim is, kids are having so much fun. Everybody, all the members and the little ones are coming, and the middle gun. It's very, very Jewish life, from Jewish identity. We celebrate every holiday. And as I said, unfortunately, we do have minyan for Friday night service, but when it starts to be difficult on Shabbat morning, early in the morning to get the minyan, then we have to make a compromise.
Of course. I didn't ask you earlier, how many people would you say are connected to the Jewish community there today?
We have about 80 members, and I would say another similar amount of people who are they are Jewish, but they're not active, but they're coming for holidays. You can see them because like in Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, you can see 100 and more than 100 coming. The synagogue is very well attended, but ongoing, it's about 80 members taken care of.
I mean, it's a very impressive history, and also I'm thoroughly impressed by what such a small community is able to maintain and hold on to. Judaism is so important for Jews everywhere, and it's really beautiful to see. Thank you so much, Jacob, for being here today. And if people want to learn more, or if they want to make a donation, I'll leave information in the description below. But it's been a pleasure having you today. Thank you for teaching us about the Jews of Paramaribo.
Thank you so much, Avital, for inviting me to speak to you today. It's a pleasure. And, we are very open, and they love guests if they're coming. And there's so much thing to see in Suriname of history. Whoever wants to ever come to visit us, you will be very, very welcome, and enjoy the beautiful country that we have. It's a country that 95% of it is still jungles, pure jungles and forests and rivers, no roads. So it is a very gem on the globe that, as I said, I hope we will be more visited, but it is what it is. But people should feel welcome, and thank you again for inviting me to speak to you today.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.